Good evening, everyone. This is Subbu Iyer from Giga Technologies Limited. Good evening to those in India. Good afternoon to those in Asia, and a very good morning to those in North America. Um, Happy Holi! The festival of spring is here upon us, but we're still working, and and it's a Friday evening. So hopefully, this is going to be an interesting session for you. Um, we are going to be talking about future of sports and enterprise perspective, and what is in it for enterprises in sports. And this presentation is a combination of research and our perspectives as to how Giga Technologies is approaching the future of sports. So without further ado, let me start sharing my screen. And a presentation is here, and I'm going to go ahead and talk you through my presentation. Uh, you know, Please feel free to share your comments, ask your questions, and I will make every attempt to answer your questions. And if I'm not able to do that within the session, be assured that I will turn around as quickly as I can to each one of you. So today's agenda, I think most of you or many of you would have looked at it. It talked about five critical points. The first one was accelerated blending. Uh, the second one was grassroots transformation. The third one about blockchain. The fourth one was for the sports investments. And the fifth one is the role of sports in our societies. So let me start with the first one, which is accelerated blending. So, digital is a space that is pervading every single aspect of life, and sports is no exception. Especially, digital brings a very distinct emphasis immediately after the COVID, when people have been exposed to the digital duality of our existence. Now, this what we talk about accelerated blending brings to focus certain key aspects. Let me take a few examples. How do you connect between your education, your training, your practice, and your learning, and how does that convert itself into performance? Now, these five elements are performed in various spaces. They're performed in a stadium where you play a game. They're performed in a practice area where you go to practice. And there is a education area which is both physical and virtual. And we have today an extensive use of video analytics. Excuse me. One of the key things that you will hear through this narrative is that a lot of the infrastructure, the analytics, the data that comes into play and is used at a professional elite level, these are currently not available at the grassroots and the amateur levels. And bingo, there straight away, I'm bringing the elephant into the room. So, sports today pervades all these three levels, from the eight segments of 8 to 18, which is the Gen A, 18 to 25, which is the Gen Z, the Gen Y, which basically is the 25 to 40, the Gen X, which is the 40 to 60, and the baby boomers, which is the 60 plus. So, sports uh, today is not just playing sports, but it is also about participating with a huge number of career options that are available in the ecosystem. Whether you are playing a sport or you are participating in it from an ecosystem perspective, the opportunity to accelerate the blending of the virtual and the physical with digital is the same. And there is tremendous amount of opportunity to answer that very specific aspect in our lives about being able to be joyful at work and basically be able to do what resonates with our heart. um, and coming to the accelerated blending, so digital identity is taking shape in many aspects of our lives, in systems that pervade us. So why not in sports, and why not this ability for digital identity to lead us through a role based access, authentication, authorization, permissions, and privileges, to be able to walk through the sphere of sports. So there are tremendous opportunities, and we will actually kind of walk through them a little bit more as we walk through this presentation. But what the numbers that you see on the screen, the today about 6% is basically where we are looking at this blend between physical, virtual through digital, and there is obviously tremendous amount of scope. Essentially, most of this blend we see is in the area of outbound logistics, essentially in being able to capture or monetize fan engagement. And so that is not the only way in which you can monetize in sports, and we will talk about that. Let's get to the grassroots. At the grassroots level, there is a tremendous opportunity. When we talk about grassroots, we basically start talking about the local clubs, the schools, colleges, universities, district level associations, the little leagues. Now there is tremendous opportunity here, and there is a lot of competition. We see the talent and workforce emerging from this level, that graduates into elite and professional level, and then segues itself into amateur level. And so this is a lifelong association, and I think that the greater emphasis that we give to grassroots transformation, whether it is again in terms we can call, whether it is playing or serving the ecosystem as the workforce of sports sphere, the sphere of sports. And so paying attention to this at the grassroots level. A simple example, it can be as complicated as somebody who is going to turn out to be a neuroscientist in the future. How can this 8-year-old or an 18-year-old understand, what is sports injury? What is the time it requires for, and what kind of attention should a paramedic give before the athlete is brought into the emergency room, right? So it is very easy to find that kind of training and learning and practice if one wants to be a sports medicine specialist later in life, uh, through school and college. So that this platform can actually actualize that aspiration. Besides, of course, it can actualize the aspiration of someone who in tennis who wants to be the next Nadal, in cricket who wants to be the next Virat Kohli, in badminton wants to be the next PV Sindhu. So or simply, someone who wants to innovate in the area of physiotherapy, to be able to find a better method than cryotherapy, for example, right? Or simply, infrastructure that can find cryotherapy for emerging athletes or grassroots athletes. These are not available to them. So where I'm coming from is that from accelerated learning, the emphasis, the area that needs most attention is grassroots. And then, of course, we come to the area of blockchain, so which is popularly understood as a financial settlement instrument or technology, and it is sadly not. It is much more than that. It is a process of valuation. So how can every contract be orchestrated digitally, and that digital, how can it create a valuation that can sustain through the life cycle of a customer, and not just a customer, but in the different areas of roles, and that value and the value that the individual or the customer brings, either as a beginner, a intermediate, or an expert, and get equitable income that justifies the expertise level. And of course, accompanied with it is the rewards, recognition, and celebration. So how can we bring about this equity, the social justice, without discrimination, which is purely based on merit? Now, blockchain is a wonderful technology and tool that can facilitate that process. And sports is a great equalizer, is a great medium through which this technology can actually see its actualization, if you may, in the arena of sports. Now, sports investment, conventionally, historically, we've had investments in sports, which was mainly a status investment. Rich individuals invested in sports, like how you have rich individuals today investing in rocket science, right? Uh, and now, but sports over a period of time has grown into an industry, with broadcasting rights and news and media, and so there is fan engagement, but the investments have all gone in the area of building teams. For example, in the Indian Premier League in cricket in India, right? If you look at the investments that were made at the beginning of IPL, two of the most successful teams, they made an investment anywhere between 60 to 80 crores. 10 years down the line, we have teams that have made exponentially higher. In fact, in the current IPL season 2022, we have two teams that have been added, one team with 1,750 crores for one team, and another almost close to that amount. Now, what justifies this increased valuation of owning an IPL team is very difficult to fathom, especially given the fact that um, when we start looking at what this IPL is going to essentially give out is a exhibition of great talent that produces entertainment every evening from I guess the end of this month for about a period of a month to a global television audience. So, what is in play here is actually the talent, and what keeps the talent engaged in actively being able to go out there every evening and perform to the stupendous amount of audience that is paying very heavily for it. So the essence is, again, so there needs to be a transformation. We need to see a greater surge of talent from the grassroots. The question is, undoubtedly, there is a lot of talent that has come forth. But the question is that enough? In a country of 1.3 billion people, is the talent enough that we are seeing that can qualify itself? And is the cost of acquiring talent in the IPL, the purse that has been spent in the auction, is there a commensurate value? Now, this is something that needs to get to come up to question from an investment perspective, because this is now no longer a private investment. There is a lot of public money involved, and a huge amount of money involved, and so there is a need for return on assets and return on investment. And how that mechanism works out is essentially from the fact that you see a transformation from the grassroots level or the workforce level converting itself into work and workplace transformation. How do you do things more efficiently? Especially, we have seen in the COVID times, there was a need to quarantine. There were additional costs in terms of the number of people that would form a squad, the support team, the additional compliance that needed to take place. Now, that is something that we need to factor in. There are, while the costs go up, there must be a justified means of being able to put money into the right buckets. And of course, there has to be an equitable return. And that equitable return is something, whether it is an individual or a customer, that Giga deeply thinks about. And most importantly, the fifth point is that while we end up spending a lot of money, and many a times the way in which the sports is conducted may seem an antithesis to everything that it stands for. Like, for example, we have an IPL team that donates a lot of money, wearing a green uniform, and makes its fans pay for donate money, but we are playing under lights. There is a lot of wastage in terms of energy, in terms of um, you know natural resources. So I think the game needs to be looked at from a innovation perspective, from a different perspective on how it can address some of the social goals. Sports, as we all know, has always been a great unifier, and we need to be able to figure out how this unifier can bring about peace, can bring about a dialogue between nations, and become an equalizer in building relationships. So the role of sports is receiving great attention from both governments as well as people in the industry who would like to see a more sustainable society. And last but not the least, while there is an interest in sport, how do we promote a healthy lifestyle, even if you're not an active sports person? So this is basically what is driving investments, and we're seeing a great movement forward. And so if you look at, and this is also being amplified from the dialogue between social and environmental roles, that athletes are amplifying and bringing to and taking a stand, whether it is in different sports. In fact, for example, there are many athletes or many teams or many leagues today that basically take a stance before every single game, whether it is about Black Lives Matter, whether it is about the Ukraine war, whether it is about any of these social issues, because they have a voice, and that voice is heard by millions of people globally and acted upon. So that has to be leveraged, and that has to be leveraged not symbolically, but rather through systems, through systematic way in which sports can become a mainstream plugged into our lives, that influences and allows us to bring about many of the, for example, the UN Strategic Development Goals for 2030 into life. Giga Technologies, the work of Giga Technologies impacts six of the major UN Strategic Development Goals measurably, and we take a lot of pride in being able to address that. So here am I, I'm sorry, here I am talking about the most important aspect, if you may, of that future of sports. The future of sports is a 650 billion valuation industry by 2030. And that valuation is basically split into four significant parts. The first one of them is that the sports is the biggest consumer ecosystem ever. As you will see, the advent of digital has given rise to aspirations, increased participation, and brought in focus to inbound operations and innovation, besides the conventional outbound logistics that is serviced by a legacy technology. So, sports industry has not been a great fan of digital so far, but if you really look at when we talk about the aspirational, when Neeraj Chopra won the javelin throw gold in India, um, just judging by the number of endorsements and advertisements he got, you can believe that he has been the most popular figure after perhaps a few cricket stars. Now, and now there are a lot of people in India, in a 1.3 billion country, who believe that if Anira Chopra could basically come from the hinterlands of North India and become an Olympic athlete, right? Then they have a chance to do that. Now, the essential part of that is those aspirations. How can we fulfill them in terms of time and space? How can we bring them? How can we bring down? Even in the case of Neeraj Chopra, he actually lost 4 years in winning an Olympic gold because he was injured at the end of the international youth international games, and he did not have the right support in order to recuperate soon enough to participate in the previous Olympics. So that and there are many such stories where there are many a slip between the cup and the lip, and I think that this conversation around ecosystem needs to be a complete one, not just in terms of the outbound logistics, but also the inbound logistics and the operations of the sports ecosystem. And we will get there in just about a minute. The next aspect of what we look at as the main contributor to the future of sports is the market and social behavior. This market and social behavior is being influenced by the proliferation of digital technology. So pervasive computing, you can see the kind of analytics that basically come into the screen, the replays, whether it is the ability in real time to be able to judge situations of the game, and any game for that matter, whether it is tennis, sport, cricket. Every single game now has a digital intervention in the game. You talk about cognitive intelligence in terms of how user behavior can be altered uh, during a game for the players, or during the game for the ecosystem that serves it, or the fan management around it, in terms of the behavior that what it can do. So today we have mastered, for example, a virtual way of pouring a glass of Coke, and prompting that for a user to buy a Coke and enjoy the drink during the game. Now that is on the commerce side of it. That is still on the outbound logistics part of it. But there is a lot of scope in sports today, which is a multi-trillion dollar ecosystem to be able to work with the inbound and operational logistics of the ecosystem. Deep tech investment, I think it is encouraging. Things are getting forward. Investors are beginning to understand that about what is the importance of biometric performance, or sorry, the performance biometrics. How it is, how digital can basically pervade, whether it is a venue, whether it is a home, whether it is a practice pitch, whether it is equipments, materials that you're using. The five essential things that need to be fused, which is the data, the talent, the talent which performs, and the talent that serves the performance. The third one being the materials, a lot of nanomaterials coming into place, which are embedded with digital systems that enable you to capture data in real time. The fourth one being the funds that is required at all the levels, whether it is the level of grassroots, or elite, or amateur levels. And then finally, the infrastructure that can serve all these three levels, so that we could have the opportunity to create and unify our societal systems through sports. So investors are beginning to understand that these are five essential areas that need to fuse. So the future will actually see a lot of these merging together in order to be able to unify sports and improve the performance of sports persons and sports itself. So we talk about these three that basically leads us into what is the core of the future of sports. The core of future of sports is essentially improving the operations and innovation. Today, there is a 75 billion global spend, and with about 1.2 billion in India itself on sports. And that 1.2 billion or the 75 billion, as I said, most of it is going towards sales, marketing, ticketing, merchandising, and so on. And I will show you evidence of that in the next few slides. So we need to understand how that spending needs to be reshaped, right? So that investors will make the right investments. That we can, while we can have the fun side of market and social behavior, we can also have the responsible aspect of market behavior brought into place. And the biggest consumer system, and this is the most critical aspect, the biggest consumer system can essentially become a C to B to B business rather than just the conventional silos of B2B and B2C. So the future of sports really is the transformation of this ecosystem of sports from a C, which is a consumer, to a business, and that is a fundamental shift. I think that we need to basically take into stride as we brace ourselves for this explosion of opportunities in the future of sports. So as I mentioned, if you look at this, the most valuable brands um, in the sphere of sports, right? If you pause and take a look at this, the names of 10, most of them are merchandisers, sports goods merchandisers. Okay, you do have, and then you have television and broadcasters like the Yes and the Sky Sports and so on. And then there is one team in the list of 10. Sorry, forgot to mention ESPN, which is at number 2. Then you have Dallas Cowboys, which is at number 10. At around number 15 is AC Milan, and I just put up a list of 10, so AC Milan is not on this list. So we can see here that the value that we talk about in sports is more oriented towards selling, right? Now that value has to pivot itself into saying that there is this much that you can juice out of the existing. You need to be able to create the new, and that new is basically not going to come from whatever the existing processes are. It is not enough to be able to convert a T20 game into a T10 game. Changing formats is just one way of doing this. But how do you basically promote this at different levels? For example, how can you make a T10 a more competitive one at the grassroots level or at the amateur level? How can you, because T10 is now, how can that become an avenue for a lot of people who did not succeed at the elite level, okay, to be able to channel themselves into the amateur level? And there are commercial opportunities there. So I think that we need to look at this whole concept of value in the sports industry. And while I speak about this, these are the questions that we keep asking ourselves at Giga, and we are answering them by building a platform that addresses all the three levels of the grassroots, the elite, and the amateur levels. And we are in the process of right now beginning to involve and immerse alpha customers through this engagement and experience of the new value. And we are, and rather than pontificate about the value, We are trying to be able to engage and get the engagement and experience of actual users, the actual roles that will work in these ecosystems, right? In order to be able to say, yeah, there is tremendous amount of value. So we work through this process of education, ownership, and commitment, where the education is about understanding how this new value is codified into a system, and that codification is then engaged and experienced by real roles in the ecosystem. And when they are able to realize that value is then propagated exponentially to a larger audience, and that is how we move our customers from an alpha to a beta to a theta state. So we keep using this term called ecosystem. And I think that the first important thing to realize is an ecosystem is not a marketplace. It is a system that shares and collaborates on creation and realization of value. When you do not have even a context of what that value is, how can you create it? And therefore, how can you realize it? Right? That is the that is at the very core of this presentation today, of this webinar today. So I think that the core, therefore, is not just repeating this term ecosystem and kind of implementing it according to what the women fancy of each one might be. We need to have a unified understanding of that ecosystem. And let's begin here with sports. So an ecosystem basically starts with an individual. And that individual then essentially advances to a team. Whether you are an athlete, 100 meters athlete, or you are a cricketer, or you're a footballer. So there are individual sports and there are team sports, right? But whether you're an individual athlete or a team sports person, you still have you have to graduate through a process of moving from a district to a state to a country to an international level and to franchises. And so there is a connection, and that first connection of that ecosystem and is from an individual to an enterprise. And in that ecosystem, that first level of connection, there are 8 fundamental roles that an individual plays. The individual plays the role of a client, and in that the type of client could be a player, he could be an ecosystem, he could be a sports medicine specialist, a therapist, a nutritionist, right? And then you have the different enterprise roles, which are essentially whether you are a stakeholder, shareholder, vendor, business partner, right? And each one of them, there is a further level role that is played. Now, that is the first level of ecosystem that needs to be established. And this is something that needs to be established by everyone in the industry, not just the people who are in the sports industry. Because we are now talking about, if it is a sports medicine specialist, this sports medicine specialist is someone who is working in a hospital. He runs his own clinic and he might be associated with a team. How do you connect these dots? The most fashionable word we have heard in the last 15 years, after Apple, is the connection of the dots. But how do you really do that? Right? Has it been done? This is the question I think we need to really ask as we have this opportunity to be able to unfold from a legacy technology to a digital technology, from information technology to a digital technology, and they are not the same. So one of the first steps that we actually need to do in building these systems, and that is what we are doing, is how do we connect this individual to the enterprise? When the individual to the enterprise is connected, that happens to be the first step in establishing an ecosystem. Now, that first step leads itself into an industry. So when we move into an industry, so here is where uh, I might be a tennis player, and I have a whole bunch of, let's say, new manufacturers. They are not the traditional big ones who produce rackets, but a few of them who have discovered nanomaterials, and they're working with 4D printing, and they will be able to produce a racket for me, who I'm a grassroots player, with a 4D printing and nanomaterial, using a lot of biotechnology, which is very, very specific to my body mechanics, and produce a racket for me at a fraction of a cost before a university game. Now that is basically how you're now connecting the dot from from an individual to an enterprise to an industry. And in the process, this whole arrangement of playing the game, having a contract, getting the necessary requisite income from it, all can basically be encompassed or encapsulated into a blockchain. And not just that, my rankings, my ratings, my performance levels can all be part of how I am seen, what value I bring, and therefore my valuation in terms of what should be my remuneration, what should be my income, which is equitable to how I can perform. And that performance is basically what brings people to the stadium. And I can, if I am performing well, and if I am a good entertainer, I should be able to bring people, whether I'm playing into the stadiums, at an elite level, or at a grassroots level, or even at an amateur level, right? And how the games can be packaged. For example, nobody ever thought that an NBA game, an NBA final will have a 45-minute break with some of the world's most, great entertainers taking center stage in a football pitch. Have you ever thought about that, right? So today, this is being dictated differently by fan engagement, what people want. They just don't want a game, they want entertainment. And it's a very different way in which this we package, and that leads us into how we connect with the seven stations of life, which is the education, governance, environment, health, wealth, mobility, and technology. Simply from the fact that how do I transport and manage the entire logistics of a game, of the players, the ecosystem that basically travels, and how do I still be able to deliver to the strategic development goals of saving water, or being responsible in carbon emissions, right? How cities can basically become useful in being able to renew, in a renewable way, in a circular way, serve, from the point of view of the infrastructure that comes up. For example, the London Games, after the London Games, how many of these stadia and the infrastructure that was built for the London Olympics have been repurposed is a great example of that circular economy. Now, a lot needs to be said. For example, in the past 20 years, around the Asian Games and around all the games that was held in India, right? The stadiums are lying, have gone to waste. They are weeded and they can't be used. Equipment is old, so there needs to be a very focused effort with respect to renewing it, into not just renewing them, but making them circular, right? So there is, and all this is basically need. So what is the difference between why India has not succeeded in being able to make its infrastructure circular versus a London, or even China? They already started, recycling the infrastructure that they created for the Olympics. So the only reason is that they have found a way to make this data driven, right? They and the data and the data drivenness is not just from the enterprise point of view. It is also from the point of view of understanding individuals and their data, and purposing the infrastructure, purposing the funds, purposing the materials, purposing the talent to serve individual athletes. uh, so, I think we're coming back to that five critical elements of data, uh, um, data, talent, materials, funds, and infrastructure being fused continuously, not just once, which is basically driven by individuals and enterprises, but individuals first, which is why just a few minutes ago, I talked about how sports will become a C to B to B. And this is the repurposing, this is the circular economy that needs to be created. Not because I am saying so, but that is the version of truth that needs to be implemented. So we need to be able to understand, in a sense, when we are talking about building an ecosystem, how that ecosystem evolves from an individual to an enterprise, and from an enterprise to a customer universe, which is role based, and from the customer universe to a sphere in the industry, which is, let's say, in the sports, it could be, it's a very different ecosystem for football, a very different ecosystem for boxing, a very different ecosystem for tennis, and so on. And from that industry, how the people who participate in that sphere render themselves useful, by connecting the dots on the seven stations of life. Now, this is something that cannot be built overnight. But we at Giga, we definitely have covered the first three bullets, and in the five sports of cricket, tennis, badminton, basketball, and football. We have covered that, and we're working towards it, and hopefully there would be a live platform that is delivered by 2023 January. So we keep looking forward to that, and that is reason one of the key things that we're doing here with this education also is that to be able to build that support. We can't do this alone, we have to build this in the ecosystem, is the realization we have every waking moment of our existence. And we will continue to reach out to you, talk you through this process, and be able to perhaps convert you through the process of education, ownership, and commitment. To be able to rally around and work together and collaborate to be able to create a better planet in the process. So the market for so we're going back to the themes that if research, this is the PwC research that I'm talking about. They had conducted on where the N is equal to 792 participants globally, industry executives in the sports industry, who basically have talked about, the topmost in that list is there is a transforming media landscape. Let's pause on that for a second and say this media landscape today is television, and is also digital, which is online, which is and online and television and digital, the OTT platforms, right? So if we pause here and think for a minute, it does not have to necessarily be only the cable television. There is an audience, for example, the startups that are out there, and perhaps not just the startups but many others, right? How can they participate and reach out to their audience with their products and their messages? We have a wonderful opportunity when the OTT can be extended to little leagues and grassroots level league games, and here is where they can have a direct direct to consumer contact which is enabled by the B2B and the B2C movement. So this is where I call back, the consumer. The consumer is able to drive that demand from a grassroots level or a amateur level, not just from an elite level. The costs of reaching out, whether the marketing, advertising, promotions, sponsorship, the costs are going to come down. You can spread your bets. There is a and this transforming media landscape, which is now opening up and can to all the three levels, needs to be taken advantage of both by the corporates and by the individuals. And what needs to happen is digital needs to bring these costs down. And we talked about in the very first slide how we can basically bring the accelerate this coming together of the physical and the virtual through digital. And this is a great example and case. The second important aspect is growing expectations of sports in its societal role. Is how can sports be a contributor to the strategic development goals? How can sports, for example, bring about peace in our current world today? Um, that is the second aspect. The third aspect is the rising voice of fan influence. That what kind of formats do you want to see? For example, in cricket, fans have been dwindling in the test format. But if you ask somebody who plays cricket, they will tell you that their aspiration is to play the longer version of the game. So if the longer version of the game has to be played, and if that has to be supported by fans, how can we make it more? How can we empathize with these fans? How can we make it more consuming for them? Right? So there needs to be an innovation in the game, and it needs to be facilitated by digital, simply because the assets that are created, they have to become circular. So, one asset that is created in India, for example, or Australia, for example, can be circulated. Those experiences, changing the format of the game from a 5-day test match that is played from 9 a.m. in the morning until 5 in the evening. If that becomes a day-night game, are there more people who are basically now tuning in, whether on television or in stadiums, right? So and then how can we make these games more competitive? And so the format has to be looked at not unilaterally, but it has to be looked at continuously as an innovation sustains itself not in a discrete process but in a continuous process. And that is where digital comes into play again. Technology augmenting physical sports. um, uh, Undoubtedly today, there is a lot of data that can be used by athletes to essentially understand their performance, not just their performance, but understand their body, understand their emotion, understand their psychology, understand their nutrition. These are available to a certain extent, not in real time, to elite athletes. To elite athletes themselves, most of this data needs to be available 24/7, 365, because now we are having IoT wearables, and all kind of devices that can capture data in real time. Now, how do we convert that data to something that becomes useful in their lives, right? um, so that is how technology is augmenting it. We just have to stop thinking about how to make people consume more, consume unhealthy stuff during games. How can that become a more responsive way in which people can enjoy sports and necessarily not consume unhealthy stuff, right? So I think we need to rethink about this market force tremendously in the way in which technology is augmenting physical sport. Concentration of financial resources, as I've been talking about, it necessarily has to move from elite level to grassroots and amateur level. There can be a negotiation about it, right? And gaming and esports, they are good in their own place, but that is not the only thing that demands the fan attention. Physical games have to demand fan attention. I would say that physical games need to demand the attention of younger generation We have to try and see, they limit the time that they spend with e-games and esports, and be able to go out there and play, and enjoy the fresh air, right? So this, I think, is the narrative that the sports industry needs to form, technology industry needs to form, and this must therefore increase the interest of and the role of private investors. The private investors must demand that, sports is a mainstream now. It is not just a side show, and how can we basically make this mainstream, and what kind of investments are required to essentially establish sports as a mainstream. I think one of the key things that, I keep promoting, I keep plugging Giga, I can't help it, but I think a platform like Giga is one that is leading the way in terms of being able to interest investors to say there is much more than esports, there is much more than just e-games, and monetizing on the consumption of fans. So there is a lot more to do in sports today, in terms of digital technology and a Web 3.0 platform, which is led by blockchain, which is on the premise of valuation and not just financial settlement. So the point that I cannot stop emphasizing, and therefore I have to bring it up again and again, is data-driven individual is essential. We need to think about it. Sports is a great area. One of the reasons why Giga decided to segue in through the area of sports into other aspects of life is that it is this has the sports industry has the least resistance to understanding the fact that data driven individual is inessential. A data driven individual can also become the way in which a data driven enterprise can function effectively, both orchestrating operations and innovation, because it is that data driven individual who occupies the data driven enterprise. And because of the fact that the individual understands that needs of transformation at an individual level, he is able to manifest that at an enterprise level, which then manifests itself as sustainability through its operations and innovation in our society. So I think this is important for us to keep reminding ourselves that a data-driven individual is the first true way in which we establish an enterprise ecosystem. At least let's begin to understand that that's the way for sports industry before we can segue to other spheres of life. So in summary, so sports has always been a great unifier, and there is no better time than now to make sports mainstream. And if we have to make sports mainstream, then there can be a negotiation that it has to be provided equal attention at the grassroots, professional, and amateur levels. And the way we do that is how do we create a steady effort in the post-pandemic shift. What is that steady effort in the post-pandemic shift? Is essentially, how does this how do we take the lessons of the pandemic of virtualizing between the physical and the virtual through digital, right? How do we, and that has to become athlete centric. The athlete centric is basically in all the three levels we talk about. And I think to a large extent, sports has been one that has always focused on sports excellence. We now need to kind of pivot that to human excellence as in terms of attracting, and there is researched evidence that says that people who watch sports today, uh, to a large extent, are attracted by human excellence in these whether it is in the field of sports, whether it is in the field of music or medicine or wherever, right? So human excellence is something that inspires a lot more people, and I think that that is something that can easily be reflected from the bringing athlete centricity, and digital has that ability to do that. Which then leads us to sustainability, and stakeholders driving sports can impact societal change. In this case, for example, investors are humongous, are one of the leading stakeholders in being able to shape, whether it is startup organizations like us, encourage the right level of funding, encourage the right level of support to be able to say yes, this pivot is required. It will take time in the industry, between from the point of education, ownership, and commitment to build that sustainability and get people's participation, and that the right level of investments are required in order to be able to make that happen. And finally, redistribution, which is maximizing the returns on an assets and investment, not just from the elite level, but also from the grassroots and the amateur levels. So I cannot stress enough to say that you know um, uh, we have to be able to look at all the three levels. Sports is a great way of bringing about societal change, especially with respect to sustainability. There is a great need today in order to be able to address athlete centricity, and bring up talent, and we need to virtualize through digital, the physical and the connection across the ecosystem. Um, I thank you so much for this opportunity for me to be able to speak to you. Thank you so much for the investment of an hour that you have made, and I hope that this time that you have spent has been useful. I haven't seen many questions basically come through, but I'm available at any given point in time to be able to answer your questions. I can be reached at subbu.ir at giga.app. You can also send any of your queries at info at giga.app. The essence is, we want to be able to engage. Um, Giga Technologies is in the process of creating this platform, not just building a technology out there, but actually immersing and involving the customers in their roles. So this is like a rehearsal for the next 9 months. This is like the process, especially when we talk about a digital platform. You cannot best ask somebody to just come onto it and start using it. They need to go through the 5 steps of creating data, connecting to an ecosystem, and then curating their connections and contextualizing them to their preferences before they can start collaboration. We at Giga Technologies are doing this. We are very excited, and we look forward to a constant interaction with you. Once again, season's greetings. It's a great spring day here in India, and I hope that the world finds solutions to the problems that we're currently embroiled in, and sports becomes a great unifier, and we are able to have these conversations in a more spirited manner that brings joy and happiness on this planet. Thank you very much, uh, and namaste.